Vishy was playing with the white pieces against Magnus Carlsen, and he started the game with e4, e6, d4, d5. We are seeing the French defense, and now knight to c3, bishop b4, pinning the knight and thereby undermining the protection of this pawn. So Vishy played e5, grabbing more space in black's territory, and Magnus here immediately struck the center with c5, attacking the base of the pawn chain. Vishy played a3, attacking the bishop. So bishop takes knight, pawn takes bishop, and now knight to c6, putting more pressure on this pawn. Queen to g4, immediately attacking the undefended pawn on g7, g6 by Magnus, and now h4. Anand is like, don't you think you've gotten rid of your dark squared bishop and now you have already weakened the squares around the king side with the move g6? But Magnus plays h6. Magnus is like, I know what I'm doing. h5 by Anand, immediately attacking black's king side, trying to open up this part of the board, but Magnus is not interested in opening up. So he plays g5, immediately locking it down. But Anand doesn't stop here. He now plays f4, aiming to open up the position one more time. But here Magnus plays queen to a5, attacking the undefended pawn over here with a threat to 4 white's pieces. So white plays bishop to d2 and now f5 by Magnus, attacking white's queen and closing down the king side position. Queen moves to g3 and now g4, completely locking down black's king side, as well as grabbing more space in white's territory. Magnus has a very strong pawn structure over here, and there is a threat of c4 which will completely lock down the position as well as grab more space in white's territory, which will make the movement of white's pieces very difficult. So therefore Anand immediately gets rid of this pawn with pawn takes pawn, and now knight g to e7, developing the other knight, and now bishop to d3, developing kingside piece, and now queen takes pawn, knight to e2, developing one more piece, and now knight to a5. The idea is Magnus really wants to stop this pawn from moving to c4. So therefore knight to a5, and now queen f2. Anand is like, hey, would you like to trade queens with me? The position is just getting cramped up a lot. Magnus is like, fine, let's get the queens off the board. So queen takes queen, king takes queen, and now bishop to d7, developing the bishop, and now a4, stopping the bishop to jump on this square, taking away the square from this bishop. And now king f7, rook h to b1, hitting the b7 pawn, putting some pressure over here. And now b6 by Magnus, bishop c7. It's a very good maneuvering. Anand is aiming to get his bishop on the a3 square, where it can control this diagonal over here. And here Magnus plays knight e to c6, controlling all the key squares on this side of the board. And now bishop a3 by Anand, and knight d8, bishop b4, hitting the knight over here and trying to double up the pawns. So Magnus responds with knight d to b7, providing defense to this knight and avoiding the doubling of pawns. Knight d4, this knight is probably heading to the b3 square in order to attack this knight one more time. So rook h to b8, since it looks like the b file is about to get opened up, so Magnus gets his rook on the b file, and now knight to b3, double attacking this knight over here. And Magnus here isn't really interested in trading off the knight, so he places it on the c4 square. And now this knight is controlling a lot of key squares in Anand's territory, and this knight is very strong over here. So Anand doesn't want the strong knight to be in his own territory, so he gets rid of the knight with bishop takes knight, pawn takes bishop, hitting the knight, and knight moves to d4. Rook to c8, and now a5 by Anand. What Anand is telling is like, hey dude, are you interested in opening up the queen side? Because my pieces are well placed over here. Magnus is like, hey, I'm not interested. So he plays b5. Just closes down all the possibilities of opening up black's queen side. And now rook to d1. Since Magnus is closing down the queen side, so Anand moves the rook on the d file, which is wide open and which could be an entry point for the rook. Bishop moves to e8, since there was a possibility of a discovered attack. So the bishop moved back, and now knight to e2, opening up the d file for the rook, and now a6 by Magnus, completely shutting off the queen side of the board. Rook to d4, rook to d8. Anand is planning to double up over here, and Magnus isn't interested in giving Anand a very strong control of the d file, so he immediately plays rook to d8 to challenge the rook over here. And now rook a to d1, forming a battery on this open file. But Magnus isn't gonna allow you to have such a strong control of the d file, so he goes for rook exchanges. So rook takes rook, rook takes rook, and now bishop to c6, putting some pressure on this pawn over here. Rook moves to d2. The idea is This bishop is very strong over here. So Anand is planning to get the knight over here where it can hit this bishop over here. And now Magnus shocks Anand with the move g3 check. What is the idea? Well, if Anand takes it, then the g file would be semi-open and Magnus can immediately take charge of the g file with the move rook to g8. The knight will constantly have to sit over here in order to defend this pawn, because if the knight moves at any point of time in the game, then this pawn is definitely falling. Also, this rook can now jump on the g4 square and start attacking the weak f4 pawn. So there's a lot of counter activity that black is getting over here. So definitely Anand cannot make the mistake of capturing this pawn. So he played king to g1 in the game, and now rook to g8 anyway. Magnus is planning to get his rook over here and start putting pressure over here. Now knight to d4, attacking the bishop. Rook moves to d8. Magnus just spins Anand's knight. Wow, what a beautiful chess we are seeing. And bishop to d6. Anand is playing beautifully. He's just unpinning the knight. Look at this. Just blocking the attack of this rook. And now the threat is alive one more time. So bishop moves to e4, putting a lot of pressure on this pawn. And now what Magnus is saying is, what are you going to do about this bishop? Because I can now capture it, you'll capture back, and in that way you'll end up giving me a pawn for free. So that's the whole idea. So bishop b4 by Anand, and now rook to d5, king f1. Since this rook is totally undefended and the knight is pinned over here, so Anand is getting the help of his king to protect the rook. So knight to d8, king e1, the rook is now protected, knight to c6. And it looks like Magnus has made a mistake. Is he offering a free knight? What's the idea? Well, this move is quite a brilliant one, because this sacrifice is all well calculated. Because if Vishy makes the mistake of capturing this knight, then he will quickly lose to rook takes rook, king takes rook, and now bishop takes knight, and this pawn is completely falling. There is no one to defend this one. After which black would have a very strong pass pawn over here. So black would get into a completely winning position. So therefore, knight to c6 is such a brilliant sacrifice by Magnus. But Vishy is also a 5-time world champion. He knows what Magnus is up to, so he didn't fall for this trap. He rather played knight to e2. And now rook takes rook, king takes rook, bishop takes pawn, knight takes pawn, bishop to f3, putting pressure on this pawn. King moves to e3, attacking the bishop. Bishop moves to d1, attacking another pawn. Magnus is just pointing out, hey, there are too many weaknesses in your territory, Vishy. How are you going to defend both of these weaknesses? Vishy is like, I'm not going to give up. He moves the king to d2, attacking the bishop one more time. Bishop moves to g4 again. And now king to e3. And are we going to see a draw over here? No. Magnus is not interested in a draw. So he moves his king to e8, king to d2, knight to e7. Magnus is like, I'm going to maneuver my knight to a place where it will start putting more pressure on white's territory. This knight would be very deadly if it jumps on the d5 square. So Anand decides to get rid of this strong knight with bishop captures knight, king captures bishop, and now king to c1. Anand is heading to the queen side of the board. King to d7, king b2, king c6, and now king to a2. Because if Anand gets a king to a3, then Magnus can get a diagonal opposition with king to c5. So hence Anand played king to a2. King d5, Magnus decided to head on the other side of the board. But he can't come on either of these squares because they are well under Vishy's control. So looks like Magnus is just wasting a move over here. Now king to a3 by Anand, and now finally king to c5. Magnus has the diagonal opposition. So Anand has to leave the opposition. So king to b2, bishop d1, putting pressure on this pawn one more time. King to c1, attacking the bishop. Bishop moves back. And now here Magnus decides to make a breakthrough. So he plays b4. And now pawn takes pawn check, and rather than capturing this pawn, Magnus decides to go on other side of the board, plays king to d4, and now c3 check, king to d3. Vishy's king is stuck in one part of the board, and black is completely dominating over here, and this is not a good thing for white. b5, Vishy is actively trying to create a pass pawn of his own, and now pawn takes pawn, a6, king to d2. Magnus isn't worried about this pawn because he knows the bishop is taking care of this square. So he moves the king to d2 to give a direct opposition to the white king, and now a7 by Anand, and now bishop to d5. Magnus is aware that there might be plans of a sacrifice over here. So he decides to get his bishop in the center of the board where it can take control on both the sides. And here both the players were running low on time. So Vishy here just miscalculated. Vishy thought that sacrificing a knight over here would actually make him win the game, but this move actually worsened his position. Why? Because he forgot to calculate that how strong these two pawns were against white's single pawn over here. So after this sacrifice, which is a mistake, pawn takes knight, and now Vishy played e6. He's trying to take advantage of the two weaknesses on different sides of the board. If you try to stop this pawn, then this is heading ahead, and if you try to capture this, then this is queening. So Magnus has to take a decision. How is gonna stop both of them? Magnus is like, I know I cannot stop both of them, but rather than getting scared of your threats, I'm gonna create my own threat. I'm gonna start attacking you with b4. Such a bold move by Magnus. e7 by Anand, and now pawn takes pawn check. King moves to a2, and now c2, and now we have reached a situation where both the world champions are about to queen their pawns. But who's gonna win this game? Let's see. Anand first queens the a pawn. Bishop captures queen, and now the e pawn queens, hitting the bishop over here. So bishop comes back to e4, closing the line for this queen, and now queen d8 check. Bishop blocks, and now queen to d4. And now here the reason why Anand played queen to d4, because if Magnus makes a mistake of queening this pawn, then Anand can immediately draw the game with queen e3 check. If you take the queen, then the game gets drawn by stalemate. Let's go back. So here you cannot take the queen, and if you move the king, then Anand can again capture the bishop with a check. You cannot take the queen, otherwise it's a stalemate again. So in either case, white will be able to draw this position. So what do you think is Magnus gonna play? Is he gonna see that the queening move will lead to a complete draw? Well, believe it or not, he did see that, and he shocked Anand with his next move. He did promote his pawn, but not into a queen, but into a knight. He under promoted his pawn. What a brilliant move. And now that comes with a check. Anand cannot move his king to the corner, otherwise he is losing his queen with a fork attack. So therefore, he moved the king to the a3 square, and now c3 by Magnus. Look how beautiful this game is. Magnus just has a bishop and a knight and a passed pawn, and Anand has a queen, but this queen is useless. She's not able to do anything. Queen to b6 by Anand, knight to e2, queen takes pawn. Anand thinks that maybe he will get another queen on the board, but that's too late. Magnus plays c2, his queen is coming, and here at this point of time, Anand resigned from the game. Why? Because he cannot stop Magnus from winning this game. Even if he tries something like queen to c6 in order to stop this pawn, the pawn queens anyway, and after queen takes queen, king takes queen, and now if h6, then knight takes pawn, h7, and knight to g6 controls the queening square, and there is no way white can win this game. So let's go back a few moves where the position was very critical. So here at this point of time in an actual game environment, it was seen that both the players smiled at each other because both of them knew that Magnus cannot make the mistake of promoting his pawn into a queen, because that would simply result into a draw. So both of them were totally smiling at each other, but Magnus is like, hey, I know this would be a draw, and I'm not a fool to make such a mistake. And guess what? I'm gonna attack you, but by under promoting my pawn into a knight. And now I'm completely winning. So here's a beautiful game played between two world champions, and Magnus Carlsen managed to get the best out of it. So like this video and subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed watching this game. And now let's head on to the question of the day. Here is a beautiful position on the board. Both the players are threatening to get a queen on the board. Black is already strong here because he has a lot of material, but it is white's turn in the game. So what would be the winning move for white over here? Let me know your answers in the comments box, and I'll see you in the next video.